Hey, Nevada. My name is Mary Beth Seawald, and I'm here at the Nevada Broadcasters Association. Our special guest today is Caleb Cage, who is the Chief of the Division of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. Caleb, thanks so much for being with us today on Hey, Nevada.
My pleasure, Mary Beth. Thank you.
You know, October 1st was the date of the deadliest shooting in modern U.S. history. It was a terrible, terrible thing, and it took place right here in Las Vegas. You're the Chief of Homeland Security and so forth. How did you first hear about that event, and what were the steps that took place in the moments immediately after that?
Well, Mary Beth, first, thank you for the opportunity to come here. And I'd like to say, this is a tragic event, and our hearts and prayers go out to the people who were affected throughout Nevada and throughout the states that had people here. So I first learned probably within 10 or 20 minutes of when the police knew about it. I received a call from Chief John Steinbeck, who is the Deputy Fire Chief for Clark County and also the emergency manager. And he relayed to me, as my counterpart at the county level, what he knew and what was going on. And it was not much at that point. In fact, it was different than what was being reported immediately, because these were all unofficial reports as far as how many people had been wounded and how many casualties there were and so on. So we started processing that information. I called my boss, Director Jim Wright from the Department of Public Safety, and made sure that we were reporting up through the governor's office, and made sure that my team was aware that there was a major event. We didn't know if it was a domestic disturbance. We didn't know if it was a fight between two different groups. We didn't know what it was at that moment. But then what happened next was we just started trying to make sense of it at that point, trying to get information. Sheriff Lombardo's early press conference was, I think, about 12:45 Monday morning a.m. Was when we started getting some of this official information as well. So really, in the first few hours, it was about making sense of this and figuring out what we at the state could do to support.
Right. And I know I've heard stories about the four law enforcement officers. I think it was Sheriff Lombardo, who was talking about the four officers who were in the hallway in the hotel, and they were from disparate agencies, all working together and planning and making a plan of action as they were going through this without ever having trained together.
So I think one of the big takeaways from this event, when we get to what we can learn and what we can share with other jurisdictions, I say we as the state, and not taking any credit for what Metro and Clark County and the other first responder agencies, Clark County Fire, were able to accomplish, because it was extraordinary in my opinion. But what we can learn and what we can share with other jurisdictions that unfortunately may have to endure this tragedy in the future. I mean, we're seeing it happen continually, unfortunately, around the country. I think one of the big takeaways is going to be that Sheriff Lombardo, his senior staff, Chief Castle from Clark County Fire, Chief Steinbeck, and others recognized that this was going to present a situation like this was going to present a challenge to various organizations here in Clark County, and they started training for this and identifying resource needs and really putting the ability for the patrol officer, the firefighter, to respond to this and make sure they were trained and knew that they were empowered to do it on their own. And I think that's why we get to this place on Sunday evening where four sheriff's deputies who were from different parts of the agency responded, came together, and set the stage for SWAT to come in, and why we saw, as Sheriff Lombardo pointed out, firefighters pairing up with police officers to go into the hot zone.
Is that unusual?
It is unusual, and again, I'm not a first responder, but my conversations around the country with my partners and with fire chiefs around the country, it's extremely unusual, and it requires huge trust between the organizations, mutual respect, and a lot of training. And that's what you saw come into be realized this last week.
Yeah, I know that there's been an awful lot of work, a lot of collaboration, and so forth. What are some more of the specifics that we've learned from this that that you predict will be put into practice moving forward?
So, one of the things that I think that we will see from this nationally, and it's already starting to trend, is Sheriff Lombardo, I believe, pointed out at one of the press conferences, and I'll misquote him here, but to paraphrase him, he said, those people you saw in helmets and flak vests out there, those were firefighters. My office oversees the Homeland Security Grants Program for the state, and Clark County, through Chief Steinbeck, identified the need for ballistic gear for firefighters years ago. And they came to us, and we took the request for grant funding to Department of Homeland Security, and it was denied at first. What are we? What is this? This is too far outside of the norm of what we're seeing nationally, and they persisted, and they kept coming back to us and saying, "Well, try again, try again, try again." And because they persisted, they were able to provide that equipment to the firefighters who were going into the scene, the violent scene where shooting was happening, with the police officers. And I think if that's not happening in jurisdictions, it's going to happen more. That's one of the lessons I think we learned right off the bat. The other one, of course, is already referenced, the idea of just pairing police and fire. I think that when all is said and done, the speed with which Chief Steinbeck established the Family Assistance Center, while the response operations were still underway, the recovery operations for the Family Assistance Center were underway as well. That's extraordinary. I don't know. I'm an emergency manager as well. I don't know how he did that, just because this was such a complex situation, and there were so many things going on. He was able to stand up a fully functioning Family Assistance Center to help the survivors, to help the people who were wounded, to help their family members get what they needed, to get airfare, to get hotel rooms, to get a driver's license if they left it on the concert grounds, and so on. That, to me, is one of the stories that we probably won't hear very much, because it was an administrative task.
That's amazing. So I thought that Family Assistance Center already was in existence, but it was brand new. He stood that up that night?
Stood it up that night, and the next morning.
That's amazing.
It's extraordinary. And that, there were people from Orlando who had participated in the Pulse nightclub shooting, people from other places that had experience with this, who were in communication with Chief Steinbeck, and I believe who communicated to him the need to have that up and running quickly. And I know he empowered a couple of people on his staff to do it and said, make it happen, and it was operational. And to me, we focus so much on the response because we have to. That's where the life safety issues are. He was able to look at this strategically and see that okay, response will come to an end at some point, and we'll need to get to recovery.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there are so many messages of resiliency out there about not only the response, but all the wonderful things that have come out of out of tragedy. Unfortunately, it's a horrible thing. But I think if there are good stories to be told, it is the resiliency of Las Vegas and the whole state of Nevada and how everybody came together.
It's been amazing to me, eye-opening to me, how quickly the resilience narrative took hold here. The idea that this is awful, this is tragic, this has impacted people in ways that we really won't know for years to come, because it's been such a significant event. And I don't think anybody misunderstands that or wants to misrepresent the pain and the trauma that this has caused people. But you hear the governor's remarks during his first press conference on Monday morning with Sheriff Lombardo and others, and it was moving to me to watch him. This is a man I've worked for 7 years. It was moving to me to watch him clearly moved by this, and to express strength, anger and sadness, but strength, and to say, we will come back from this. And later, before he was introducing President Trump, he said, I believe it was on the Thursday press conference, again, I don't have the exact quote, but he said, Nevada's been through hard times before, and we're going to come back from this. I needed to hear that. I know that other Nevadans needed to hear that. This
Yeah.
was not something that was going to break us, but this was something that was going to pull us together. And as you pointed out, you saw those stories in the newspapers of the firefighters who were off duty and came back on duty because they knew this was a huge event. The people in the crowd who responded, how the community has responded, and how all of these different pieces have pulled together to show Nevada's not going to be broken by this. Las Vegas is not broken by this at all.
That's true. I would totally agree. I've heard all those same stories, and it's been wonderful to see this community and this state band together. The broadcasters did Unite Nevada Day last Friday, and broadcasters from all over the entire country sent us photos of them holding up signs that said hashtag Nevada Strong with their blue and silver, and people from all over the country were really rooting for Las Vegas and Nevada to pull through this horrible time. So it's been great to see that, at least.
I saw that you did that, and I didn't know that that was the national response. That's incredible. It's really truly incredible, and thank you for doing that.
Oh, well, you're welcome. It's a broadcasters initiative, and we were very, proud to be able to help. And as part of the first responder team and getting information out to the public and educating people on exactly what's happening, we play a big role in that, especially during times of emergency, when people need to know if there's a flood or a terrible shooting like this or fires. Radio and TV are the first places people go to find out information to keep themselves safe. So we're happy to be able to help in that way.
And that's one of the I think interesting things about Nevada. I don't know how many states have recognized broadcasters as first responders, but this communication element is crucial. And you know this as a professional communicator, but communication during these events is crucial. People wanted to know immediately questions like, once it seemed as though the situation had been stopped, but people wanted to know questions about motive. People wanted to know, was there an additional shooter or gunman involved in this? And if you look at the questions, the nature of questions that were being represented by the media, these were questions about the ongoing threat. What was the continued threat to the community? If there was a second shooter, there was another person who was loose,
Right.
and these sorts of things. And so as Sheriff Lombardo and his team made sense of this through their investigation and their response activities, they were able to directly speak to the public through broadcasters and say, this is what we know, and they were able to bring that sense of solace and closure, I think, immediately, at least to the threat, to the public. And that's just what the sheriff was able to do through his series of press conferences. Mm-hmm. It's then multiplied by people who were out there on the scene very quickly, putting themselves, quite frankly, in harm's way, because they didn't know the answers to those questions.
Right.
And yet they're standing there at the scene giving the public that information. So, and that, of course, speaks to the role that the Nevada Broadcasters Association has had on the Homeland Security Commission as well, driving these policy changes, driving these discussions. I know advocating for continued communication, and it's an important voice to have there.
Yeah, absolutely. We're thrilled to be part of the Homeland Security Commission and to have a voice. We're thankful to have that voice because it is so important to educate the community and the public during times of emergency, so we're really proud of that. Back on the topic for a second, can you speak to some of the legislation that is now coming up? I know Congressman Kuhn put out a press release today that he is introducing legislation, the Keep America Safe Act, and that he introduced that would limit high-capacity ammunition magazines. We're talking also about bump stocks and so forth. Can you speak to that legislation and how, from the Homeland Security Commission standpoint, what you think about that?
So we're watching this play out, and quite frankly, I have not had. Chief Steinbeck and I have talked about the bubble that we're in at the Family Assistance Center, and seeing not being able to really be engaged with the public discussion that's going on around us as much. So I hadn't seen Representative Kuhn's press release yet. I did know last week that there was a national discussion at the federal level on bump stocks and things like that, which frankly, I'll admit I had never even heard of before this event, and I think I'm not alone in that. But I know that discussion is playing out. I know that there is a discussion among state legislators as well to do that. I know there's discussions going on right now about some of the other policy measures that have been in the state. That's not really really my lane at all on the policy side. I will say that going forward, we will be paying attention to it from a Homeland Security standpoint, and if anything comes our way to implement, of course, if it becomes law through legislation, then we'll do what we have to do and what we need to do to administer it.
We hear a lot about Las Vegas about being a soft target or a hard target. Can you explain a little about what that means? I mean, people kind of have an idea, I think, what that means, and we look at things like New Year's Eve, and are there any changes that you see forthcoming as a result of this for some of the bigger holidays?
Yeah, so I think the terms soft target and hard target are kind of generalized terms. I think everybody who uses them maybe has a different perspective on what that means. A soft target is just the idea being that it's a target that a large amount of damage can happen there, right? I mean, and you look at what happened this last week, where 22,000 people were in an open air concert and that sort of thing. I think that kind of defines the soft target. And a hard target would be more like an airport, where you have a series of security checks and safety checks and reviews before you can get into it, for the most part. Or at least the public side of airports, right? So I think that what you heard the governor say during his one of his press conferences, I don't recall which one is, we are going to learn from this. And this was early on. I think it was Monday after he was speaking to a news outlet, and he said, once the investigation's over, we get a full picture of what happened, we will learn from this. And I know he means that, and I look forward to being a part of that conversation to say, okay, how does New York City handle New Year's Eve? Because that's more people than we have on the Las Vegas Strip. 320,000 people there on the Las Vegas Strip last year on New Year's Eve. How do they do it? What precautions do they take? Are there ways that you can do metal detectors and things like that? I've already been engaged with our Clark County counterparts to have that discussion about what needs to happen, and I know I'm fully committed to that discussion, finding the resources that are necessary. And I know from the governor's comments that we will do what we have to do in order to support those efforts.
Well, I know on behalf of certainly the broadcasters throughout the state of Nevada and Nevadans, we appreciate your service in the military, your service at Homeland Security. You've done a phenomenal job. I know the governor's happy with you, and certainly Nevadans should be happy and proud with the job that you've done at Homeland Security.
Thank you, and thank you for what you do.
Well, thank you very much. We're here with Caleb Cage, Chief of the Division of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. Once again, Caleb, we appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
All right. Hey, Nevada, that'll do it for this edition. We'll see you next time.